I'm going to start off just kind of giving a little bit of background on what we're trying to do today, and then we'll talk about some of the specific tools and how to use them. And then at that point, I'd like to share my screen and we'll go through the checklists. Just because a checklist is really only as effective as the user of the checklist. My intention is to explain some background information behind what's on the checklist so that you're just more prepared to understand maybe the whys or just little things that the checklist itself doesn't convey that'll make it more sense, or things that you can see when you start doing evaluations. One point I wanted to start out with, in the real world, there really is no such thing as a 100% accessible facility. Even the very best built facilities probably have some form of inaccessibility. That's just reality. It's not a get out of jail free card by any means. But I did want to let you know that, just so you understand, if your facilities do have inaccessibility, that's just kind of how it is right now, unfortunately. A former colleague of mine, used to say that there's no such thing as a 100% accessible facility. It just, how long is it going to take me to find what's inaccessible? So just understand that going forward. Another part of doing this exercise is to get you some hands-on experience, and just to understand if this is something that you might be able to do yourself or not. It's really not rocket science. It just does take some familiarity with the standards and an eye for spotting inaccessibility. All right, so let me start off with the tools. The tools that you need are pretty limited. I think Kevin said that he ordered some and that they'll be available to ship around different departments. That way you guys are on the same footing. But it's pretty much just 3 basic tools and a clipboard. One tool, pretty much everybody has one of these: measuring tape. 25 foot will probably get you able to measure most things. If you can go longer, that's great, but I wouldn't stress about it. The next thing would be a level. A digital level like this one is more user-friendly because it can give you the gradient as a percentage right on the spot. A lot of the requirements for slopes in the standards is provided as a ratio of rise over run. So you might see 1 in 12 as a limit. If there's any question, just plug that in the calculator, multiply by 100, and that's your gradient. One thing to note about digital levels like this is that it's important to calibrate them before you use them. So make sure that you retain the operating manual for the digital level, if that's what you're using, to understand how to do that process. It should be different on every manufacturer's product. Generally speaking, a 2-foot digital level is ideal for a couple of reasons. Longer levels do exist, but a longer, like a 4-foot level, can sit on high spots and hide low spots. So it won't necessarily give you the most fidelity in the information that you're getting. Also, 2 feet is a good approximation for the distance between the rear drive wheel and the front caster wheel of a wheelchair. So you actually do get a better idea of what a wheelchair user is experiencing by using a 2-foot level. So that's why we do that. If you do use this in the field a lot for measuring the ground, I have seen people make kind of handheld or just homemade carriers for these out of hanger wire, because if you're doing this all day, you have to bend over all day and pick it up all day, and that can hurt your back. But if you can construct something that you can just, the level stays on the ground and you just kind of pick something up just below hip height, it makes your day a lot easier if that's what you end up doing. It's not a requirement, but that is something I have seen. Um, the last specialty tool is a door pressure gauge. So what this is these you can find on eBay for $38, just or not eBay, Amazon for about $38. Fun fact: before the pandemic, they were about $8 on Amazon. So why that got more expensive, I don't know. But there's an indicator with the pounds of force necessary, and as you depress or push against an object, there's an O-ring that'll give you a reading on how much force that took to operate. Generally speaking, operable parts in the ADA, anything that is operable is limited to 5 pounds of force. So when we're talking about things like, and we'll get this later on, but like a door, automatic door button, automatic door opener button, this might be a good tool to use that, not only to measure door opening force, but just opening force in general for anything that has an operational force limitation. So that's a good, important tool to have. And then it's a clipboard, clipboard to write down your information. You can have a tablet alternatively. This is a practice that is best performed with a team of two. One person who can perform the measurements and take photographs, and the other person who can document. It'll go way more swiftly if you don't have to keep switching back and forth between documentation work and measurement work. It's a good idea when you do find an interesting finding to take a photo of it. That way you just have that visual evidence to go along with the data that you're collecting. Okay. One point I wanted to make, as you're doing data collection, there's often a point where the data collector feels overwhelmed with all the inaccessibility that they're finding, and not only the amount, but the mind starts getting ahead of yourself about how are we going to fix this. This seems like a relatively small issue, but it is non-compliant, but it seems like it's very difficult to fix. This stage is not for that. This is just data collection. So don't get overwhelmed with the what ifs and how we're going to address this, because remember, program accessibility states that programs need to be accessible when viewed in its entirety. So not necessarily every single inaccessible element needs to be made accessible as long as the program is accessible within its entirety. Until you have that broader picture, focusing on the minutia while your data collection is going to be more stress. That's just not necessary at that point in time. So I just want to warn you against that natural human tendency to think about how we're going to do this. It's not your problem at that point. It's purely collecting the data. And then the last thing I wanted to mention before moving on to the checklist is that if you're looking to find inaccessibility at facilities, the two most likely areas that you're going to find them are going to be in parking lots and restrooms. Parking lots, they're outdoors. They're more susceptible to degradation by weather. They're more susceptible to damage by tree roots, things like that. Things can change more rapidly outside than inside. And it's coupled with just a lack of understanding in the initial design about accessibility. Restrooms are very easy generally to find in accessibility. And I would say mostly because of the human need for convenience. There's a lot of things that make life convenient for maintenance staff, for example, convenient for designers, but it's just not accessible. Not too long ago, I gave a presentation at the Pueblo Community Conference Center. And during that presentation, we did a walkthrough, and I just did a cursory look at the men's restroom on the first floor. Within a minute, I found 13 things that were inaccessible. It was just very easy to find things that could be better. And a lot of these things are pretty easily fixed. So with that said, I'm going to want to start to share my screen. How do I do that?
There should be the arrow. There should be an up arrow there.
Mm-hmm.
If you click that present now.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. So these are checklists that I mean the Northeast ADA Center provided them. I didn't make them, but going through them for this purpose of this presentation, I realized that there were some holes or some gaps that needed to be filled within the checklists themselves. Mostly because those checklists, I believe, were designed for Title III entities in mind, not necessarily Title II. They're very applicable to Title II. And what I have done is I just made a supplemental elements document to emphasize just some of the areas that were either omitted or underrepresented in their importance in the original checklist. So I just wanted to go through those first. And if at any point, it's probably better to, if you have a question, to just let me know on the spot. It'd be probably a little hard to go back and forth or go back from the end. So if you could do that and make it an audible notification for me, that would be excellent. So, okay, can you see the me going through this Word document?
Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the first one I wanted to emphasize, the first aspect of general accessibility awareness is that protruding objects apply to all circulation paths, not just accessible routes. This is an area that is somewhere in the checklist, but I don't believe it's properly represented because really any circulation path that exists, whether it's accessible or not, is still subject to requirements for protruding objects. A protruding object is an object that protrudes from a wall that's 4 inches or more. That's located between 27 and 80 inches. And the reasoning behind this is that when you think about somebody who's blind using a white cane that sweeps, they're looking for things on the ground that they might run into, but there's an upper limit to what they can detect. At 27 inches, that's pretty much the last point in time or the last physical point where they can detect something with enough advance notice to not run into it. So between 27 inches as a minimum and 80 as a maximum, 80 being the basically, for tall people. There are people that are blind that are taller than that, but that's the ADA are minimum requirements. So that's one thing to be on the lookout for everywhere you go. Pretty much anywhere that's public facing, you want to be aware of objects that protrude from walls. This can be fire extinguishers, this can be AED devices. These may need to be addressed. Could be signage, post-mounted signage can also do that. Anything that's post-mounted has a 12-inch protrusion limitation, not 4-inch. So that's just something to keep in mind. That's where we go. Okay. Understand that interior doors are subject to a 5-pound maximum opening force. And just a quick question, can you still see me or just my presentation, just the Word document?
Chris, we can see you. Hey,
Okay.
Chris, I did have one question for you on the 2784. So what you're saying is that the if we have a protruding object that is, you said 12 inches out, it cannot be lower than 27 inches from the
No,
door?
sorry, excuse me. So if you have a post-mounted object that is more than 12 inches from the post, that's protruding into the circulation path if it's located between 27 and 80 inches. So that would be the range that you can't detect it before you walk into it. You can treat these, and this is a little bit beyond what we're doing right now, but these can be treated by locating permanent objects below them. So you can have a lip or something like that underneath the post, underneath the sign, for example, that if that limits the protrusion to 12 inches or less, then you'd be good as long as it's detectable at 27 or below. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so just an example of that might be something like a fire extinguisher. If it was, let's just pretend that we had a fire extinguisher that was 18 inches protruding. If it's installed higher than 27 inches but lower than 84 inches, it's
80, excuse me.
80 inches. That's going to be someone's going to run into that, essentially, is what you're saying.
Essentially, and one of the distinctions to make is that a wall-mounted object has a 4-inch protrusion limit, and a post-mounted object has a 12-inch limitation. So, a fire extinguisher mounted flush to a wall can very easily protrude more than 4 inches. A lot of times in newer buildings, they're recessed, at least partially. You can locate something permanent underneath that object so that it acts as a treatment, a warning, so that people can understand that there's something in that space and avoid it before hitting it.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay, so back to doors. Interior doors are rated at a 5-pound maximum opening force. What I wanted to talk about here is how to perform that. When you have one of these, depending on where you press onto the door, you'll get different readings. If you push on the door closer to the hinge, it's going to require more force because you have less leverage. If you push where the handle is, you're going to get an accurate representation of the opening force. So that's one aspect of how to use this that's very important. If push on the door where you would push with your hand. Use your best judgment. Make it make logical sense in that regard. The other aspect behind measuring door opening force is that door opening force is when the door seal has been broken so that the air pressure on both of the door has had an opportunity to equalize. And then you start measuring until you get to a full 90-degree opening. Door opening force is not intended to take into account the pressure differential. And that can happen very commonly on exterior doors. That can be a barrier, even if you are meeting the requirements. And we'll get to that in a few moments, but how to measure door opening force is important. Were there any questions on that?
Chris, there was a follow-up question here, and anybody who has a question, feel free to unmute. And Chris had mentioned, because he can't see the chat, feel free to hop on and ask the question. But I'll ask this one for Marion S. She did ask, she said, quick follow-up question about the protrusion in public-facing areas. Does this apply in a classroom where protrusion impacts the path of travel for students?
Path of travel for students. I'm not sure what that means. If it's something that, I mean, yeah, I suppose it would. If it's located between 27 and 80 inches, a blind student wouldn't be able to see it and could run into it. If it's treated properly where there is something underneath it, the object itself could extend below 27 inches, that would be considered compliant as well. But you'd really just have to put yourself in the shoes of somebody who can't see and try to understand, is there any obvious way to avoid this, or am I going to hit this if I can't see it?
I think I understand what she's saying now too. So basically we're talking about an area that is 27 inches from the ground. So about 2 foot 3 inches from the ground up to 80 inches. we don't want protruding objects. You don't want like a block of cement sticking out of the wall. So I think she's thinking about
Yep.
kiddos who, so a lot of kids 2 foot, 3 foot tall.
Mm-hmm.
What happens if they can, because they're not going to. So like anything below 27 inches can protrude because a white cane would pick it up. So I think
Mm-hmm.
she's thinking about students who may be smaller, but actually, yeah, they would still pick it up with the cane. So
Yep.
um,
Yep. And this only applies. I mean, just to clarify, all this only applies to permanent aspects of the facility. I'm not sure if that makes a difference in the question or not, but it's really just anything that's permanent that can be changed. That's what we're talking about here. So, like a directory sign that says, this way, and if it's mounted at 36 inches and it protrudes 6 inches, that would be that would be clearly a protruding object because you could run into that. Interestingly enough, later on we'll talk about this, but a drinking fountain can also be a protruding object if it's just protruding from the wall without proper treatment. But we'll go through that in a few minutes.
thanks, Chris.
Mm-hmm. Okay. One other point about accessible surfaces, and this applies to all accessible routes. One thing to understand is the accessible route is really what ties accessibility together. Having various accessible elements doesn't really matter if you can't get to them. So the accessible route is really the heart of physical accessibility. One thing to look out for, especially when you're looking at exterior, are abrupt changes in level. This can be caused by cracked and broken concrete from tree roots, or just abrupt transitions at curb ramps. You'll want to vet them that you're limited to a 1/4 inch maximum vertical change in level, and up to a 1/2 inch you're allowed if you bevel the top half at a 1-to-2 ratio of rise to run. Anything greater than a 1/2 inch, you're obliged to treat it like a ramp under the ADA standards. And anything under 6 inches will not require handrails, will not require edge protection, but it will have slope limitations.
Chris,
Okay.
that's 6 inches in height, right? A
Yep.
ramp
6
6 inches
inch.
in height.
Yep. Exactly. And then this is another point I wanted to make when you're doing evaluations. A ramp is not a curb ramp. Under the ADA standards, there's a section for ramps and there's a section for curb ramps, and there are similarities, but you'll do yourself a favor by just categorizing them as separate entities. A curb ramp is its own thing. A ramp is its own thing. A curb ramp will never require handrails or edge protection. That's a big misunderstanding that can happen. Getting back to this section, when we're talking about entrances, especially as a public entity, you have an obligation to provide programmatic access. If you can't get through the front door because it's so heavy, even if you're compliant with the fire department's regulations for door opening force, that's still a barrier for people with disabilities. Public entities are more likely to offer an automatic door opener as an option to mitigate these barriers than private entities. So that's why I wanted to include this section because of that responsibility and the general aspect that there's more expectation and a little bit more potentially funding to do that. Automatic door openers are expensive. They're generally found, banks, large banks will usually have them, but mom and pop shops generally won't. Not that they shouldn't, but they're not required by the ADA. They're not strictly required by the ADA. But what is required from a Title II entity is program access. So it's very feasible that could happen. That might be the case, or it could be an option. That's what this section is about. This is about locating the push button outside of the door swing so that a person does not have to get hit by the door to use the door. making sure that the button itself is located within a reach range between 15 and 48 inches above the ground. Yeah. So this next section is specifically for toilet rooms, and it's a very similar thing. Sometimes toilet rooms are designed very tightly, and an automatic door opener might be the solution. The ADA standards actually do allow door openers to be used to mitigate the fact that there might not be proper maneuvering clearance from the door. So if you have a door that doesn't have adequate maneuvering clearance, it's potential that an automatic door opener could fix that problem. The stipulation is that the automatic door opener has to remain open in the power off mode. So if there's an emergency, the door just goes to open and people can exit that door freely.
Hey, Chris, do you
Mhm.
mind if I just clarify? So when you're talking about maneuver room, what you're saying is it 36 inches? Is it 36 or 48? Or what is it?
Um, for maneuvering clearance at a door, it actually depends on the orientation of the door, the approach to the door, and the setup of the door, whether it has a closer or a latch, a locking mechanism. There's a big section in the standards that is helpful for understanding that. So I can't really tell you what that is off the top of my head. It's very door dependent.
Well, I just wanted to say that for folks who aren't familiar with this, what we're talking about in the maneuvering space is if someone gets into a room, they need to be able to turn around using their mobility
Oh,
equipment.
that's a different topic actually. That's a turning space. Turning space and maneuvering clearance are different things.
Thank you.
Yep, turning space absolutely you should have those, and they are required in certain spaces. It's just a good practice to include them even when they're not required. But maneuvering clearance is actually a clearance around the door that people with disabilities need to maneuver either their bodies, if they use crutches, or their mobility devices in order to open the door. If you have things located in these clearances, like trash cans, that'll impede a person's ability to operate a door. The trash can can be moved quite easily, for better or for worse. It's an easy fix, but it's also very easy to mess it up again. That's one thing that most places I go, especially if I go somewhere, use the restroom, almost all the time there's a trash can in the maneuvering clearance to get out of the door, and that's just a disturbance to people who use wheelchairs. Um, I put protruding objects back into toilet rooms again because it's such a prevalent issue in toilet rooms, specifically when we're talking about paper towel dispensers. They're often just located along the door, around shoulder height, clearly above 27 inches and below 80 inches. They usually protrude more than 4 inches, and if that's a space that you can walk, that's a place that you can smack your face if you're blind and if you don't realize it's there. Um, and again, it's just realizing that it's any circulation path. One thing to understand about wayfinding with people that use a cane or people that can't see is a lot of times people that can't see will walk along walls for orientation. And that's why protruding objects from walls is so important, because it's an important navigation technique that they use. But that does put them at an elevated risk of running into something. So that's why your facilities need to reflect the protruding objects requirements.
Hey, Chris, we got another
Mhm.
question in the chat here from Mary Inez. It says, Chris, can you please confirm that an ADA operator can replace a door that can't meet ADA accessibility to the building? I'll read that again. Can you please confirm that an ADA operator can replace, so I would say ADA coordinator can replace a door that can't meet ADA accessibility into the building? So meaning if the door is not accessible, should it be replaced? I think is what she means.
I mean, if it affects program accessibility, um, there one thing that's important, background information on physical accessibility is that when you have existing facilities, there are some limitations in place. Sometimes doorways can't be widened, for example, if the doorway itself is load bearing to the facility. That's one limitation that you might, if you have that. I have been aware of that, and I think a friend of mine in Salida told me that one of the county buildings had that happen to them. They had planned to knock out a wall, then they found out it was load bearing. They couldn't do it. Um, so there are some limitations to the access requirements. But in that case, because of program accessibility, you have other options for a public entity. You can relocate the program potentially so that you don't have to go through that door. If that's not an option, you might need to explore other options of mitigating. Can it be something that can be provided to the person instead of the person having to go through there? Can it be provided at home? Can it be provided online? Those are the kind of things that you'd be thinking about in that situation. But for right now, we're just really thinking about what are these barriers. We're just trying to understand what they are in the first place. This is a representation of a clearance. So when you have clearances, especially around doors, this is what a maneuvering clearance requires, that nothing is located within this clearance. Nothing, especially movable objects like trash cans. Number one offender, in my opinion. If you have a permanent issue, a permanent object located within a door maneuvering clearance, understand that you do actually have an 8-inch allowance from the door face that you can offset the maneuvering clearance. So whatever orientation your door specifies the maneuvering clearance is, let's say if there's, a short protrusion in the bathroom, it could be a grab bar that goes up to the door frame. That's technically not allowed, except that the maneuvering clearance can be offset by up to 8 inches. As long as when doing that the maneuvering clearance doesn't overlap anything else that's permanent, you'll be good in that situation. Drinking fountains. I wanted to mention drinking fountains because for the sake of program access in older facilities, you do have something called safe harbor. Safe harbor is a provision of the ADA where if your facility was compliant with the 1990 standards, but is no longer compliant just because we're on the 2010 standards, that means that your facility, that the entity should not be punished because the standards changed. One of the provisions of the 1990 standards that's important to know is that it only required one drinking fountain, and that it would be wheelchair accessible. The current standards require 2 drinking fountains, one that's low and the one that's a high unit. But if you only have one drinking fountain, refer back to the 1991 standards. Excuse me, I said 90 earlier. The 91 standards. If that fountain is compliant with the 91 standards, you're technically compliant unless you're going to renovate that anyway. At that point, you would change it to update it to the new standards. But if you only have, let's say, a few years ago, I was in Jefferson County looking at the courthouse. They only had one drinking fountain, but it was compliant with the 91 standards, so that was not a barrier. Bottle filling stations are more common now, and they're not part of the 2010 standards, but they do fall under program accessibility, so they do need to be compliant. You can't replace a drinking fountain, one or the other of the high and low units, with a bottle filling station or a water bottle fountain, but you can replace all drinking fountains with bottle filling station. That's equitable. Plumbing code might not allow you to do that. That's something you'd have to cross-reference there. But you cannot have a low unit and a bottle filling station instead of a high unit, or vice versa. That's one thing I wanted to mention. And then the last part in this section was the fact that drinking fountains can be protruding objects, but the bottom edge of the low unit is required to be 27 inches maximum from the floor minimum from the floor to allow for knee clearance to get under it. if a drinking fountain, the low unit, is mounted at 27 inches, that will actually act as a treatment for a protruding object. So in this example, the photo is a little bit hard to see, or the rendering, but you have on one side, the left side, the high unit, which would have been a protruding object if the wall beside it were not extended. Because that wall is extended, it does not protrude into the circulation path more than 4 inches. On the other side, if not for the low unit, it would be considered a protruding object, because in that side you can approach it and it will protrude from the wall more than 4 inches. But when that low unit is mounted at 27 inches, it acts as a treatment for that higher unit. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. Yeah, this is great, Chris.
Okay. I think from here, I just switched to a different checklist. Did that reflect on the screen for you?
No, it didn't.
No. Okay. Let's change that. Windows 31. Okay. So these checklists are organized in 4 different areas, and on the website that they come from the New England ADA Center, you can get one large checklist where they're all grouped together. But these are based off of the Title III priorities, so take that with a grain of salt for a Title II entity. But priority 1 would be approach and entrance. Priority 2 is access to goods and services. Priority 3 is restrooms. Priority 4 is other amenities. And what we'll do today, with the amount of time that we have left, is we'll try to get through as much as priority 1 and 3 as we can, because that's where you're most likely to find inaccessibility. All right, were there any questions before we start this section?
No, sir, I don't think so.
Okay. All right. So you're gonna have to start at public site arrival points. So that'll be your accessible parking or your connection to a public sidewalk. You're just gonna want to make sure that everything is accessible there. We'll start with parking. This is the scoping for parking. This is pretty straightforward. Understand that accessible parking, you're always going to need 1 van space at least, and it's based off the amount of accessible parking that you have. So for every 6 or a fraction of 6 accessible parking spaces, you're required to have 1 van accessible space minimum. Van parking needs to be designated as van accessible. Parking needs to be designated with the international symbol of accessibility. Alternative symbols of accessibility are not accepted under the ADA, so be aware of that. There are some alternative designs that exist that I've seen in public facilities, even in Colorado Springs. I've seen them. If they are required by the ADA, they need to be the traditional ISA. If they're not required by the ADA doesn't prohibit it. One thing to understand there is that the painted marking on the ground is not required by the ADA. That's typically required by building code. So you'll have to figure out what their requirements are, but it's not an ADA issue.
Chris, could I just real quick? I just want to sit forever because we have varying levels here on the call. So just as a general rule for folks who have facilities, I think what I just saw in this, Chris, is that for every 25 spaces in your parking lot, you should have at least 1 accessible parking space. Is that correct? Okay. Correct. That's an easy thing everyone can check. Go out. If you're missing spaces for every 25, you don't have a space. Okay.
Exactly. It's very easy. The checklist tells you what to measure, but doesn't tell you how to measure. When you're measuring, you measure from the center of the lines. If you're abutted to a curb, you measure to the amount of accessible portion. So one of the aspects of an accessible surface is that for parking, is that the ground surface must be free of changes in level and have a 1 in 48 maximum slope in any direction. So if you're up against a curb, it depends on how that joint looks. If it's just straight to the curb, you can use all the way until the vertical portion of the curb. If there's a drainage dip or anything like that, you'd probably have to stop where it stops being accessible.
And Chris, on this access lane, real quick. So in
Mhm,
Colorado, I know it's different. So aren't our spaces here? Our spaces are 8 foot wide,
mhm.
and so our access lanes are 8 foot wide as well, or are they 5 feet here?
They can be either.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, the federal minimum is 5 feet. The with a van accessible space, you have an option between an 11-foot wide space and a 5-foot aisle, or an 8-foot wide space and an 8-foot wide aisle. The reason you might choose one or the other is that you have, if you need two van accessible spaces and you share the 5-foot aisle, or you have to provide 27 feet of width. But if you have 8, 8, and 8, you have 24 feet of width. So providing 8, 8, and 8 is providing the same accessibility, but with a smaller footprint, for example. Um, there's a vertical clearance to be aware of. I want to go through things that are less apparent, so forgive me if I go through this quickly. So that's an example of the ISA that is required. 36 inches wide for the accessible route. And that's everywhere you go. The accessible route needs to be 36 inches wide. It can be narrowed to 32 inches, and this is specifically to get through doors, but you can get through bollards this way. Make sure that if you do have bollards, that there is at least a 32-inch minimum clearance to get through that. That 32-inch clearance that reduction can only last for 24 inches as an FYI, and you'll need a full 48 inches of 36-inch width after that point before you can reduce again.
Chris, if I could just real quick, just because we have some ADA coordinators on the call who are going to be advocating with leadership for a need for facility inspectors and stuff like that, and for funding. So just as a super high level quick check that they can do in their parking lots is, do you have the appropriate 4% of your spaces? Are they disability parking spaces? So one of every 25 of your spaces. Do they have an access route? And do they have it? Just making sure I read everything on this paper here right. Do they have an access route that also connects from the access lane to the front door? So is there a path of travel from the disability parking space in the access lane to the front door of the building, and is it 36 inches wide? Like, I'm just giving, I really hope that the folks who don't do facility stuff can leave with 3 or 4 takeaways so they can go out and do a check. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely correct. One thing to understand is that if you have an accessible entrance that is different from the main entrance, you do need signage placed to reduce the amount of backtracking for as much as possible. The worst thing you can do is have somebody get to the barrier before they have a sign that says accessible entrance this way. Head them off before they do that.
Hey, Chris, where should the parking spaces be in the parking lot?
The accessible parking is required to be on the closest accessible route to the accessible entrance that parking serves. So if you have multiple entrances, you can have accessible parking that's dispersed, and it's really on each intended parking space should correlate with the accessible entrance that it serves. A closest accessible route doesn't always mean closest route. Sometimes it can be physically further away, but if it is an accessible route, that can happen. That is a possibility. It's more of a Title III issue that you can relocate parking spaces to further away places, and that potentially could happen for Title II. but it's just something to be aware of, that if you have, you're really looking for your slopes, essentially. If your accessible parking, if the closest parking to the front entrance is on the slope, but there are parking spaces a little further away that are not on the slope that is compliant, and there's an accessible route that complies with accessible route requirements, that could be your best option for providing program accessibility. One quick, this is a good section. One quick test for operable parts is if a part is operable with a loose fist. Rounded doorknob handles, you can't operate them with a loose fist. No tight grasping, pinching, or twisting of the wrist is allowed for an operable part. And this is not an official test. It's not a requirement, but it is a good way to gauge if something is compliant with operable parts. It's a good litmus test.
So if folks are just, because a lot of folks are just going to kind of walk through their building after this, walk into their parking lot. If they find doors that require open hand movement to open the door, there very likely could be an accessibility issue there. Because
right,
gotcha.
Right. And if there's a door that requires, like there's a lock that you have to twist to operate the door, and it goes back, that could be an issue as well.
Okay. Hey, Chris, if you maybe we can open it up for questions real quick, because we only have 5 minutes.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to kind of summarize what I heard here, Chris, which was protruding objects shouldn't exceed 4 inches from the wall. Go ahead, Chris. Sorry. I
go on. I'm just putting on some in the background, and this is a good illustration of that operable parts requirement.
I was just going to say, I think an easy test for everybody on the call is if you walk through your building, if you have something sticking out of the wall more than 4 inches, yes, I mean, there could be some type of exception, but in general, what we want is that not to be there. We don't want things sticking out of the wall in that area of 27 to 80 inches in your parking lots. We need to have one accessible space for every 25 spaces, and those parking spaces should be at the closest accessible route to the door. And we should not be requiring folks to operate doors and other operable parts with the use of their hands. It should be accessible with a closed fist as well. Just trying to get some high level things they can check for, because I think a lot of folks are going to be making their case for why they need more resources to get to this point, you know?
Yep, absolutely. And I mean, this will go through and really just does a good job of spoon feeding you everything you need to know. This is a very common issue that happens in accessible toilet stalls, where there's a coat hook that's missing, door handle. There should be also a door pull on each side of an accessible wheelchair accessible toilet compartment. That's often missing as well. These are very simple things that can be addressed. Were there any other questions?
No, Chris, only question I have is if I could have you back at some point. I think there's a lot of stuff to cover. And I think what I'm going to do, I don't know if you're available in October or not. If you're not, it's okay, no pressure. But I may go through these checklists and go back through this one more time, because with everybody, if you can join us in October, even just for a Q&A, so folks have time to kind of digest this and maybe do a walkthrough of their buildings, they can put together a list of questions and then just have a Q&A, because everybody's going to have unique things. And we can, if you're available, it's up to you.
I think getting together in the future would be good, whether it's next month or the month after. This is one thing that I think would actually be really good to point out right before we leave. A side grab bar in a toilet, the way that the standards write these, it becomes an effective absolute. One thing to understand about the ranges that you're provided in physical accessibility in the ADA standards is that when you have a dimension provided as a range, you're allowed no tolerance whatsoever, because you have that range. When it's when you have this side grab bar, you're actually provided with a few different ranges that create an effective absolute if you use the minimum length grab bar. So that means if you use a 42-inch minimum grab bar, which is the minimum requirement, you have to be absolutely dead on the installation 12 inches from the wall right here in order to hit the endpoint over here. If you use a longer bar, a 48-inch bar, then you have more leeway. You can install this end, the left end on the photo within 12 inches, 8 inches, 6 inches from the wall, and then you're gonna be fine on the other line. So that's a very easy fix or something to look out for when you're in a restroom stall.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you soon.